Hello, everybody. Welcome to the IC Topic Chat today. Today it's April 18th, 2024. We're conducting a firm topic, which is something we do about 4 or 5 times a year. It's specifically focused on topics that are of interest to people who have or want to form into a firm. The way I'll define a firm is maybe more than one employee, probably two, maybe some people have defined them as five, but anyway, the point is two or more employees who work for a firm. Today's topic actually probably just as relevant for people who are doing a lot of subcontracting and need to form some additional policies, but we're talking about employee handbooks, which is, it goes back, and I feel like there's a lot of stress around this because there's policies and people are being held to standards. And did you read the employee handbook? As you can see in this funny little graphic here from Silicon Valley, by the way, if you ever get a chance to watch the show, hilarious TV show. It's all about kind of a company on similar to maybe a Google or a Yahoo or one of these organizations that are forming out of Silicon Valley, and all the kind of craziness that it takes to become the next NVIDIA or something like that. Let me pull up my slides here on my screen. So I'd like to dedicate the session today to, she's not here because she's with Susan in Taos, New Mexico, to Ann Price, who has the very famous quote, at least to me: "I know my firm has grown too large when I have to develop an employee handbook." And so in many ways, she's never wanted him to develop an employee handbook. So I'm dedicating this session specifically to her, who chooses not to have an employee handbook. So this little graphic I'm putting before you here is taken from a book called Orbiting the Giant Hairball, and it informs a lot of things that we do at Goshen, a lot of the ways that particularly the way I think about how we develop our handbook or our policies. The gist of the book was written by Gordon McKenzie, who worked for Hallmark out of Kansas City, and he was a graphic artist who wrote, well, cards, birthday cards and different types of cards for people. And he was a creative person. And he became the manager of this creative group at Hallmark and realized that, well, Hallmark was a business and it needed to operate, but his group needed to be creative, and he needed to create kind of a firewall between the creative group and the administrative structure. And so he started kind of thinking through, and this became kind of a relatively popular book about 15 years ago. But he saw that Hallmark constrained the creativity of what needed to happen within this group of card designers. And his view on Hallmark, and I think is fairly accurate for a lot of organizations, particularly large organizations, is that every time you make a decision or you write a policy, you are effectively, or even writing an email that people need to follow, you're creating a hair, and these hairs start to tangle and they start to grow until they get bigger and bigger and they have mass. And so what you don't want to do is get caught into the middle of the hairball, because you won't ever get anything done, right? And it becomes, you're trying to follow all the policies and procedures and know that you're doing X, Y, and Z appropriately. So he talks about the importance of orbiting, because the hairball now has grown to the size of a planet and has mass. You want to orbit around the hairball and not get stuck in the middle of the hairball, which you can see here in this graphic. And so, and he talks a lot about that in this book, if you ever want to read it. It's a really kind of a fun one. So he's a graphic artist, and so there's the entire book is full of graphics, just like what you're seeing here. And you can read it in less than 2 hours. Most of us can, I think. I'm a pretty slow reader, and I think I did it in two hours. This informs how we think about things. So what this means to me is that the hairball is something I'm trying to avoid. I don't want to put in a policy for the purpose of putting in a policy, unless I feel like it has necessity with the firm. Another thing I want to talk about with employee handbooks is they're an extension of our values. They illustrate what and why we want to do things. Anyway, that's in the next thing. What they are is a document composed of our various categories to share with team members or our subcontractors. We do it to communicate our expectations so we can have accountability across with our staff, with our team members. It gives us direction. It organizes expectations, what we can expect of one another, what as owners of a firm our staff can expect of us. How do we develop them? I mean, the way I did it was I had to do it out of necessity because I had a staff member and we just kind of rolled with it. And then once we started having more than one, I realized we needed to get organized about this. So I started with just like, what do we need? So some of the first ones are like hours. How are we doing? How are we tracking hours and things like that? I would review policies from other like organizations. So for me, I looked at a lot of universities because I formed Goshen Consulting as effectively like a research institute that would be working for a university, except we're 100% independent. But I like to think that we operate like we operate like a research institute ought to operate at any university without all that hairballness that every university I've ever been a part of. So I review those existing policies. Then I have initial conversations with my partner. Previously, it was just had a conversation with myself and just kind of like, what do I think we ought to do? And then convened whomever it was going to affect and talked about it with them and said, does this make sense? Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm right. Let's change this around. And then we would edit it. And frankly, we haven't edited the employee handbook substantially for a couple of years. So it's kind of exciting to see some of my team members, my coworkers here, because they're going to get a sense for what is in the handbook, why we put it there, and also how we can change it. So I do want to say again to my coworkers, I think everything is up for question as long as it makes sense for all of us, because it's a team approach. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to hit on several of the different topic areas that I have in our employee handbook and for your consideration. I'm going to try not to go into super specifics. It's just words on a page. I didn't do the graphics like I like to. It's like a lot of times I didn't have a lot of time, so I wrote a really long presentation. If I had more time, I would have condensed it and made it more pithy, but all the key points are here. I think it's important to start an employee handbook with a welcome and orientation statement, because this may be the first thing that somebody reads about your organization who's considering coming to work for you after they've looked at your webpage. It should convey your values, who you are, what you want to do, why you exist. And after somebody's hired, I likely send this to them and say, make sure you read this before we sign a contract to employment contract. And then I'm going to go through it with you in the first couple days of coming to work with us. I think the first thing after that ought to be a confidentiality agreement, because of the type of work that we do, the type of clients that we have, type of organizations that we work with. There may be an additional confidentiality agreement with some of our clients and some of our projects, but I start with this. Everybody who comes to work with us, whether you be a grad assistant or a student worker or anybody, everybody needs to understand that we're working with confidential data, and that everything needs to be held in confidence. I even in here quoted AEA Guiding Principles D2 about our professional ethics. That's from American Evaluation Association. This is an area I think that's kind of controversial for some. I don't think it's very controversial because it's about protecting the interests of our business, about non-compete, conflict of interest. So we have a non-compete clause, which it's very specific and there's a lot of detail to it, but effectively means if you come to work for us, we don't want you to take our intelligence about how to operate and come and directly compete with us. Now I'm not saying you couldn't leave and go and start your own firm. That's entirely possible, or even outline how that could be done. We don't want you to go and directly compete with us within our market with our current clients, or steal our clients away from us. And so that's why we have a non-compete. I also say after all of these, come talk to me. Like if there's something that's not right and you feel like you need your independence or you're ready to start your own firm, um, I um, would be inconsistent with who I am if I didn't want to encourage that. But I also want to make sure you're not doing something that's going to affect the rest of our staff, because we're all working towards a group idea. And if you want to compete with that, then you're working against the group. And so I think that that's a problem. There's also conflicts of interest. This happened to me once where I was ready to hire an individual. I was really excited about this person who had a lot of skills and was going to bring a lot to us. And then right before we were getting ready to put together a contract, this individual says, "So you don't mind if I work on the side to develop my own consulting practice and leave in about a year, right?" I was like, "How did we get this far? Like, how did that happen? Like, don't you know we can't do that. That's not okay." And that realized I didn't have that written in to our policy manual or our employee handbook, and so I had to change that. So, but also, if somebody wants to work and do another job, they can't work and do similar type of work even outside of hours, particularly if unless talking to us. But we have an individual who works with us who is starting up a taekwondo studio, and he does that completely on his own time. It doesn't conflict with the type of work he does with us. That's perfectly fine. But if you wanted to do side hustle consulting on top of working with us, that would be a conflict of interest. So that would be something that would not be okay. Intellectual property, royalties, and PD. This is one of the things that I'm most proud of with our approach. We do want to share um, some of our revenue back with our staff as bonuses when they do things. Now, this is not the primary work that they do. This is work that they do in addition to the typical consulting work that they're going to spend most of their time with. This came up mostly, and the only way we've used this is when our staff have developed uh, trainings, much like this, but paid trainings. And I thought it was, if they were a university professor or something, they would get all of this money directly. And I thought, well, I don't know if that makes sense because they're doing it on our time. And so I decided I personally did not want this money. Like this didn't need to come into the firm. So we created a special checking account and a special fund just for our staff. So whenever they do that, if you make, let's say, $3,000 on training, we give that staff members, if they're working with our computers and they're working on our time, we'll take 1,500 of it and we'll give it to them. And the other $1,500 will go into a professional development fund that is used by everybody for going to the AEA conferences or paying for online trainings or anything like that. So that's something I'm really excited about. I personally don't want any of it. I do benefit from it. I also take part in professional development, but I actually probably contribute the most to it because if I make anything for professional development, 100% goes into there. That's just the way I operate. But with everybody else, it is they get 50% and the other 50% goes into that fund. We do want to encourage our staff to develop things that will receive royalties or that's considered intellectual property. We want to, I have all these big ideas that have never really come to fruition, but around creating these kind of passive income kinds of things that are maybe a big software program that has a limited amount of daily effort, but a lot of upside in the way of revenue. If it's a super profitable venture, and however we want to define that, we have it designed where 1/3 goes to the individual, 1/3 goes to the firm for having the foresight to think of this, and 1/3 goes to the professional development fund. And this is something that should be pretty lucrative, I think, for everybody in this situation. All right. Next section, payroll related benefits. And these are the sorts of things that you see that are going to affect your payroll, like healthcare and retirement, anything that may require a contribution. We talk about what that is. Certainly, there's a lot to talk about. We could talk all day about healthcare. We could talk all day about how to set up retirement. I'm not going to do that, but this is a section where you'd want to talk about that. Certainly, I think we don't have this, but a lot of intangible benefits. We have a lot of intangible benefits with the way we do our work, with hours and things like that. And that's all related throughout things you're going to see, but we don't have them necessarily explicitly listed out in the manual, but those are things you also may want to think about in this section. I could give an entire workshop on this next section on work hours. But this is important. You need to give it kind of your expectations for when people work, how they work, how they take time off. This is where we talk about your schedule, communicating your schedule, paid. What is paid time off? Are you doing paid time off? Are you doing sick time and vacation time? Do you have comp time? Comp time is when you work too many hours. Maybe this week you worked 50 hours, and next week you want to work 30 hours and you take 10 hours of comp time. How do you track that? How do you communicate that? Those are all important. And the expectation that people are tracking their time and how they go about doing it. So we use Toggle. This is also an area where you may want to communicate expectations for how they spend time. So we have an expectation that all of our consulting staff spend a certain percentage of time on what we call client-facing work or client-related work. What percentage of time in different positions would they be spending on business development, professional development? We don't have this is definitely an art. It's not a science, and we have certainly not figured it out. But this is something where we do think about. Time is our currency. So this is super important, and needs to be a lot of room for communication. There's a lot of room for miscommunication and frustration, as you can see in this slide. Speaking of time, what time do you get off that's not related to time that you take off as paid time off? So what holidays do you observe? I mean, typically you're going to observe Labor Day, Memorial Day, Thanksgiving, and the Christmas holidays or the December holidays. This is definitely a space for setting your values, right? This is an area that's complicated in many ways. I chose not to get too deep in the weeds with this. So I effectively outsourced what are our holidays to our local university. And so whenever they're closed for an official closing, as they are in late December, or if they're closed for holidays, that's what we observe too. Because I think that they go through such a detailed process of thinking and considering these things that they do a better job than me. I can't go to that depth of understanding. And so far that's worked out pretty well. And they have labor unions that negotiate this stuff. So I think that works out pretty well. And actually it works out that our staff get quite a bit of time off in addition to their PTO. And I think all of us appreciate that. I particularly appreciate the time that last week of December when pretty much nobody's expected to do anything, and you don't have to kind of pay attention to your email even if you're away. It's a really good quiet time. PD. How do we want to support our career growth for our staff? What can they expect? What are some things that we have in place for them? So you can read through this if you want, and I will share all of this with you after the fact. Remote work. We have remote work. Some people work remotely some of the time and come into the office some of the time. We also have folks who work 100% from another location, from another state, and that's a decision we made to include and hire really talented people. And what does that mean? I think there's a lot of room for us to think about what this all means. I have a very long policy that I just basically took from another organization that needs a lot of thought, but it seems to be our remote work is working for us, I think. But this is an area for you to think about. You want to make sure you understand what you're doing with this piece. At-will employment is a state policy that is irrespective to my organization. I repeat it because if we find ourselves in a situation where, and I hope this never happens, but if we have a person who has a serious violation of a law or a company policy or does something really unethical, and we need to separate from them, they need to be fired. All of our staff need to know that can happen. I hope it never, ever, ever happens. And I think there's a lot of things that for almost every situation we can do long before we get to this, but at-will employment is something that is a right for both our staff and for us. If somebody wanted to leave us immediately without any notice, they could do that just as well as we could remove a person. I usually spend a lot of time describing why I put this in here with our staff. I never hope to do anything like this. This was something that a previous office manager insisted we have in here, and I think she's probably right to have it in here. It makes me uncomfortable to have this conversation. And this is another area where I feel a lot of anxiety because I hope we never have to let somebody go without any notice. But if we get to that point, I guess we have the right to do that because we're not at a place, and we may never be at a place where we have like guaranteed employment or separation in our employment contracts. Performance reviews. This outlines how and when reviews should occur, shares expectations and imparts values of the firm, and it provides direction for how a staff member can be successful in their role. A little bit more on performance reviews in a couple slides. Dress code. I think you, like me, we all kind of dress comfortably so that we can do our work in the best fashion possible. I am a very functional in my dress code. Um, I'm fairly vague in our dress code policy because frankly, I don't know what people should be dressed in, and particularly people of the opposite gender from me. I don't know if I could do a good job with that. I share examples more so than exactly what a dress code looks like. I once worked for a professional services firm that said very specifically that men should be wearing a certain kind of shirt and undershirt, and it was kind of almost embarrassing what they wrote. I will say there are occasions where we will maybe in front of a client, and if we don't share with our staff, particularly our younger staff, some of whom may not know better, uh, how we expect them to present themselves, they may not know. So that's why it's here. But this has not been an area of concern for us. But at some point, I think there are a lot of millennials who came of age in an online format, and they find themselves in a professional setting and they don't know how to dress. And I think that if we don't share that with them, then they won't know. COVID-19 policy, a lot of us dealt with a lot of very serious considerations around COVID-19, and I felt like it was important for us to share our expectations around COVID-19. We were also a government subcontractor that required certain things, and so we communicated those things. Back on employee reviews, we have position descriptions, and within our position descriptions, this is an area we've spent a lot of time with recently with our folks, and talking about positions and levels and what matrix of those expectations should be. The matrix is a series of different types of things that different aspects of their job that they might be involved with. Some of it may be data analysis and some of it may be professional development, and whether those expectations at different levels. So from a student research assistant up to a principal and all the positions in between, we have those. This is actually probably more what we're thinking of with our performance reviews. Where are you in this matrix? You should be expected to do X, Y, and Z because you are at this position. If you want to move to the next position, here's what you should be able to do at that level. And so that's where I think our performance reviews are going. But we do have a performance review process that I described before. And it also gives instructions for a newly hired staff member. Here's what you should be expected to do. If you're not doing this yet, here's where here's direction for you. Or, hey, I've mastered this stuff. What do I need to do to get to the next level to demonstrate I'm ready for the next challenge? These are all different policies in our manual, but I've kind of grouped them all together. Equal employment, non-discrimination in the Federal Medical Leave Act, Family and Medical Leave Act, sorry. Some of these things are not required for a small firm, but they're important to me. And I feel like they're important to our staff, and so they're included for us. You can look into what all these are, but for us, it was share, this was about our values of the firm, that we did believe in these things. And it also gives direction to our people who are managing others within our firm on what our values are and how they should be operating with others. It's a pretty small firm so far, and so I think we're all pretty familiar, but honestly, it's going to grow, perhaps, probably will grow. And as it grows, having these things in place is important, so that particularly supervisors understand what our values are and how they should impart those in the way that they manage the others that they manage. We do have expenses that people can get reimbursed for around travel or client meetings and things like that. So this gives direction for how to expense things to the firm, how to get those reimbursements. Emily Johnson, who's with us today, takes care of a lot of this, and she spends a lot of time thinking about this. We just recently went off to an Eclipse event in Carbondale, wonderful event. And so everybody who drove there gets mileage to go there and back, and they get a per diem for the day because most of us were gone all day. And so this gives direction for them on how to get those expenses reimbursed. And also, I think it's amazing because a lot of our staff come from places where they just were expected to pay for stuff out of their own pocket while they were on the job. And so it demonstrates that we actually are a responsible firm. So it kind of communicates this is the way real consulting firms operate. We do have mandates that grants require us to include with the way that we operate. Like, for instance, I can't make contributions to Iran because I receive funds from the state of Illinois. It's not something that comes up often in conversations or something that I'm very worried about, but it are things that I do include within the manual. And then finally, I know I probably presented a hairball to you. I've tried to avoid that, but all the things that I've listed are things that have become important to us. There are things that I think can be important that are not yet policies. There are considerations for the future. And so there's any number of things that we could be talking about, like with break policies, or how do you resolve a dispute, sexual harassment policy, a social networking policy, substance use and abuse. And really, if you go looking for things you can include in an employee manual, you will probably find a never-ending list. So with that, thank you for listening to me for these 24 minutes and 20, well, I don't know, maybe that's right. I don't know how long I've been going, for far too long anyway. So I'm gonna pause here to go right into the conversation. So for the folks out here in YouTube land, I'll see y'all later. For everybody else who's live with us today, stick around.